Nigeria's independence on October 1st, 1960 was met with joy and sighs of relief. Nigerians would finally run the country. However, at the beginning of the First Republic in 1963, the lofty expectations expected of Nigeria were rapidly dashed. Nigerians entered a destructive age that would demonstrate their incapacity to rule themselves. After gaining independence from its British colonial masters, Nigeria automatically joined the Commonwealth of Nations. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the leader of the Northern People's Congress (NPC) in the House of Representatives, was appointed Prime Minister, while Dr. Benjamin Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first Premier of the Eastern region, was named the Governor-General. The Governor-General served as Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's envoy in Nigeria at the time, so the independence was only partial. This system was in place for 3 years following Nigeria's independence until October 1st, 1963, when Nigeria became a republic. Nigeria became a republic in 1963. The First Republic was accompanied by several problems brought on by the forced union of the various regions, including the 1914 amalgamation, the fall of the constitutionalism, the federal system's design, political instability, electoral fraud, abuse of the rule of law, foreign media interference, and others. These problems grew to be inconsequential factors in the First Republic's early collapse. The multifaceted crises that defined the period's politics and contributed to the Republic's demise were what made it so politically unstable. When officially distinct political units were combined in 1914, the nation was created under false pretenses and without any attempt at real integration, just for the colonial power's administrative convenience. The British policy of divide and rule, which encouraged deliberate efforts to foster discord among Nigerians to prevent their growing stronger against colonial powers, made matters worse. So, it was not surprising that the impacts of divisiveness were felt by the promising nation. The top parties in each region gained the majority of seats in the 1959 federal elections held in anticipation of independence and the establishment of the First Republic, but none of them was deemed stable enough to form a national government. A coalition between MPC and NCNC was required. The regional premiers were Ladoke Akintola in the west, Michael Okpara in the east, and Amadu Bello in the north. The establishment of Nigeria's First Republic was already precarious due to the numerous inconsistencies in the Independence Constitution of 1960 that led to the dissolution of law and order. The president's authority or relationship with the prime minister was likewise unclear. As a result of the political importance given to the population, the 1962 and 1963 census had an impact on the political unrest. The census's results became highly contentious as one region accused the others of inflating the numbers and counting both persons and items in order to outperform them. Serious political riots like the Western Region Crisis and the Tiv riots, in which many lives and properties were purposefully destroyed in a wanton manner, occurred in the First Republic. The federal government undertook a national enumeration exercise on May 13, 1962, among other things to enable it to decide how to distribute or allocate seats in the parliament and to establish the foundation for the distribution of federal resources for economic and social development. It was discovered that the figures had been improperly adjusted. Ibrahim Waziri, the then Minister for Economic Development, insisted that the numbers for the Eastern region were reportedly exaggerated to give the region an unfair edge. Once more, While the eastern and northern regions immediately reported their results before mid-1962, the western region's results arrived November 2nd, 1962, after the deadline. Therefore, the minister decided that a second round of the enumeration should be conducted in November 1963. Serious animosity and rancor spread throughout the regions as a result of this debate. The 1962 census was adopted as a yardstick by the southern political parties, especially the resentful NCNC, in their quest to rule the political scene. Every region had hoped for a large headcount, which would ultimately determine the allocation of parliamentary seats, which took the strength of these regions into account. The scale used to allocate resources to areas was based on population because it was so significant. It was also used to assess whether a new territory would be viable. The census, however, evolved into a conflict between the nation's regions for control of the nation's soul. Due to the intense competition, there was a great deal of lawlessness, including electoral violence, falsification of election results, distortion of demographic numbers, and other problems. Despite evidence of falsified numbers being found in the southern regions by the head census officer, the northern region continued to have the numerical edge. The results of the 1962 counts were cancelled after the South failed to obtain dominant seven-figure results, and the new census was undertaken in 1963. After a protracted legal battle, the NCNC finally agreed to recognize the 1963 census. The establishment of the Midwestern region was a contributing factor to another issue Nigeria faced in the First Republic. In July 1963, the Western region was split to form the Midwestern region. The formation of the region was loaded with controversy, politics, and arguments. All three political parties, the NPC, AG, and NCNC, had political arguments for or against the region's development. In the end, the area was established with Dennis Osadebe serving as the first premier. The dread and mistrust against the regions increased when the Midwestern region was established. The problems with the 1962-1963 census gave rise to the crisis of the 1964 general elections. To win the elections, all major parties participated in widespread election cheating. The political parties rejected the results and accused one another of manipulating the elections in areas where they did not win, effectively calling into doubt the legitimacy of the government established as a result of such elections. Electoral manipulation, therefore, led to such a high level of distrust across the regions that it served as a key catalyst for the protracted chain of events that ultimately led to the First Republic's collapse. Widespread violent protest and commotion followed amidst doubt, quarreling, and accusations. This resulted in numerous fatalities. There was a destruction of property worth millions of Nigerian pounds. According to the BBC, there were 700 people dead and 1,000 people injured. It was widely known that each political party orchestrated riots during the 1964 general election campaign. The opposing party made counter-charges of thuggery and hooliganism against party members. This quickly turned into intra-tribal conflict, especially between the Hausa and the Igbo. This was demonstrated in 1964 when the NPC administration forbade the NCNC party officials from entering Bauchi for a meeting. Numerous violent occurrences that included numerous fatalities during the election campaigns were mostly the consequence of the two alliances' private armies. The opposition party was allegedly intimidated and subdued by the governments of each region. Nigerians held their first ever general elections in 1964, at a time when the nation's politics had become bitterly divided and had devolved into a fight between two rival coalitions. The Nigerian National Alliance, which consisted of the NPC and NNDC on one hand, and the United Progressive Grand Alliance (UPGA), which was made up of the NCNC and the AG on the other hand. Each regional party openly intimidated its rivals during the elections. The nature of Nigeria's independence caused an economic crisis to grip the First Republic as well. The contradiction inherited from the neo-colonial political economy was not resolved by the Nigerian state. The government surrendered its economic strategy to foreign exploitation and put it under the political control of the Western superpower. Conflict also existed around the distribution of revenues and allocation of various industries. In general, dishonest politicians grossly mishandled and embezzled the economy. The wealthy prospered while the underprivileged kept suffering. In the first 5 years of independence, along with rising inflation, the wealth disparity against upper and middle classes widened quickly. This economic disparity and the widening class gap did not foster regional unity. Another issue with the First Republic was the absence of effective leadership. A lack of strong, effective, purposeful, and energetic leadership prevented a young country from reaching its full potential. The political authorities of Nigeria were unable to fix the nation's socio-economic issues. Instead, they turned to corruption. By 1965, they were renowned for their consumption and disregard for the masses. They failed to cooperate to work for the benefit of the country as a whole because of their greed. They were unable to deal with pressing national issues including development, national integration, and ethnicity. Instead, they started manipulating local socio-cultural concerns to dupe the populace. There was skepticism that tolerance and compromise were the types of leadership traits required for the nation's survival at the time. This was because such characteristics were crucial for the management of a large and diverse nation like Nigeria. Because they lacked the political culture to uphold democracy, it was clear that the politicians were not devoted to making the system workable. Further conflicts for state control among competing parties were fostered by the uneven character and nature of development among areas and groups. These factors exacerbated intergroup, interethnic, and interregional tensions, which eventually aided the Republic's dissolution. Despite the optimism and fervor of the early Republic politicians, parliamentary democracy in that period soon lost its direction, and instead of being patriotic and nationalistic, government officials gravitated towards ethnic, tribal, and occasionally religious leaders. The West, on the other hand, had internal problems in the Action Group, while the South felt that the North was too dominant. After that, the bloody conflict between the fractions of the troubled Action Group, led by Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola and Obafemi Awolowo on May 29, 1962, led to the declaration of a state of emergency in the Western region, which eventually served as a necessary prelude to the fall of the First Republic. The confluence of all these problems that surfaced before and during the First Republic hampered politics. These problems appear to be the cause of the Republic's downfall, since the coup of January 1966 was allegedly motivated by corruption, political squabbling, the incapacity of the ruling class, repeated allegations of electoral fraud, and general unrest, among other things. In September 1963, Awolowo and other defendants were found guilty of treasonable felony and handed a 10-year prison term in the case of Awolowo. Awolowo's imprisonment was the final nail to the coffin of the dead Action Group party. Due to a series of problems, the Action Group AG lost its power in 1963. When Obafemi Awolowo was the leader of the party and the federal opposition in 1962, the Western area became embroiled in a political conflict. The Western region's premier at the time and the Action Group's deputy leader was Samuel Ladoke Akintola. There was distrust between Awolowo and Akintola. Akintola had been charged with treachery and insincerity by Awolowo for attempting to form an alliance with the Northern People's Congress. This infuriated Awolowo, who interpreted the action as part of a scheme to convert the Yorubas into northerners. This split culminated in a string of disputes that disturbed the calm in the Western House of Assembly. The conflict between the house groups of Awolowo and Akintola turned physical on Friday, May 25, 1962. Following this, the Western region was plunged into a serious crisis that was later known as Operation Wetie. Majors Emmanuel Ifeajuna and Kaduna Nziogu used Operation Wetie as a main justification for their January 15, 1966 coup that overthrew the First Republic. It was so brutal that political party thugs raced after people, especially members of the opposition party, grabbed them, tied them up, doused them in gasoline and petrol, and then burned them on fire in the open. 7 police officers and almost 200 civilians died as a result of the crisis. The outcome was that the federal government declared a state of emergency in the area in order to take direct control of the region. The federal government's actions put the AG on a life support machine. In the midst of all of these, the police discovered enormous quantities of weapons and ammunition in the possession of AG members, in addition to the accusations of poor administration and misuse of finances. The party was accused of planning to overthrow the government. The federal government would eventually pull the plug on the action group's life support machine when the party's leadership and Chief Awolowo were pronounced guilty of a treasonable felony. Awolowo would be sentenced to 10 years in jail, while another stalwart of the party, Anthony Enahoro, bagged a 15-year sentence. During Awolowo's testimony in the witness box, he dismissed on April 2, 1963, all claims that he and his followers planned to overthrow the government violently using torches and weapons, claiming that no evidence of such an event could be shown in court. Chief Awolowo announced from his box seat that it was a realistic objective to seek to win the office of head of state in any prospective election. Chief Obafemi Awolowo accepted any punishment the judge would impose on him before he was handed a 10-year prison sentence and sent to Calabar. Several events led to the fall and death of the action group in the Western region, despite the successes the party recorded before and after independence. Chief among them was the Western Regional Election of October 1965 and Operation Wetie. You can check out the full story in our next episode.